really looking at that rank order of maybe the top 3 or top 5 or top 10 departments that your department interacts with the most, and then rating them. And then really considering where you might want to spend some proactive time to work on that relationship, that interaction, that silo. And interdepartmental rounding would be one of the practices that you could use as part of that effort to improve the collaboration between your department and one or more other ones. Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzlaff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage. Hello, thanks for pressing play and joining us today on Culture Change RX. This is a Culture Byte episode, and this is Sue Tetzlaff, co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions, and I am alone in the studio today for this episode. And today the topic is on collaborative behavior. We like to call that teamwork on steroids. And it is the opposite of something that is termed silo behavior. So we're probably all familiar with silos in healthcare organizations, and those can come in many forms. So one type of silo that can exist is between departments. So each healthcare organization typically is set up with an organizational chart that has a hierarchy of people who report to leaders, who report to senior leaders, and the like. And it's usually organized in departments. And so group or like services are grouped together, like laboratory services, imaging services, revenue cycle services, different nursing services, etc. And so you can have a silo within the hierarchy, such as employees to managers, managers to senior leaders, and the like. So that's one type of silo that can exist because of an organization chart. But another most common type of silo that can exist in an org chart is in between the different departments that are represented on that organization chart. And that's really the type of silo behavior I want to talk about. Today, I really want to focus this episode on departmental silos and shifting from being in silos to being more collaborative across silos. One thing that might be a good exercise to consider related to departmental silos is to consider the positive and negative impacts of silos even existing in between departments, right? And really considering what are the downsides of silos. One of the things that I researched in this regard a while back was that silos between departments are often the root cause of inefficiency and one of the biggest obstacles to great workflow. For patients, silos can be perceived as disorganized care or services, something like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and ultimately in clinical departments, it is often the patient who experiences poor care or service that ends up being the loser in a turf war between siloed departments. There's some older research in this regard related to customer experience professionals and executives that showed that silo mentality is the biggest organizational hurdle to improving the customer experience. Now, that's not specific to healthcare, but I could certainly see where that would be true in the patient experience and customer service related to patients, is that silo mentality and behavior would be a hurdle to great service. And then think about the positive side, right? Like, what are the positive impacts of effective collaboration between departments, on patients, on employees, on physicians and providers, and overall in your entire organization? What would be the positive impacts and ripple effect of teamwork on steroids? So a good activity might be to consider, where might we have departmental silos where those are pretty obvious? And also, what's the downside of that? And then maybe look to where you see there's maybe more collaborative activities between departments and what's the upside of that. And it really starts to paint the picture about where our opportunities lie and the why behind why we should even care about silos and care about overcoming silos and reaching for more collaborative behaviors between the employees that work in different departments in a healthcare organization. So as I mentioned, I really wanted to focus on what types of things can you do to foster collaborative behavior and break down some of those silos specifically between departments. So a common activity we might have healthcare leaders do at a leadership training event where we're working on elevating results and performance of an organization, and we're working on training leaders to elevate things like the employee experience and the patient experience, is we love to do an activity around learning the tactic of interdepartmental rounding. And many of you have likely heard of, engaged in, or practice employee rounding, where if you're a leader of a department, you spend one-on-one quality time with your employees, asking them very specific and purposeful questions that you can use that information to, one, build relationships. Just that conversation and activity can help strengthen and build relationships with your employees, which is a very important relationship between leaders and their employees, and then to garner some very helpful and useful information for improving the operations of the department and gaining that information straight from your employees who are closest to the processes and the patients and the coworkers and whatever in your department. So that's one form of rounding, is for that purpose between an employee and their manager. But another form, like I'm suggesting here, is related to managers rounding with leaders and employees and providers that are in different departments than the one that they manage. And again, you'd want to consider, before you just took your time and energy to do this, you'd really want to consider a couple things. One is, what are those other departments that your department interacts with the most to get your work done, to achieve your department's work, right? So let's say it's an emergency department, and what are the various departments that interact with the care of emergency room patients, right? Often it's imaging and cardiopulmonary and pharmacy and maybe admitting or registration, laboratory, those kind of things. So think about the departments that interact the most with the department that you lead, and consider maybe ranking them on a, 1, 2, 3, 4 basis or whatever, in a rank order of their importance to the work of your department running well and achieving great results. And then beyond ranking them in that order, also rating them and considering, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, your perception of each one of these individual departments as to the level of positive collaboration. And a 1 might mean the tension is high and collaboration is at an all-time low. And examples of this might surface daily. So that might be a low rating of a 1. Or all the way to a rating of a 10, which means we interact seamlessly, effectively, and collaboratively in our interactions between the people and the processes of each of our departments. And I can't remember the last time there was an issue where things went awry between the interactions of our two departments. So really looking at that rank order of maybe the top 3 or top 5 or top 10 departments that your department interacts with the most, and then rating them. And then really considering where you might want to spend some proactive time to work on that relationship, that interaction, that silo. And interdepartmental rounding would be one of the practices that you could use as part of that effort to improve the collaboration between your department and one or more other ones. And so you might want to look at, in particular, if there's any of those ranked as very highly important departments. And then if they're rated very low or even moderate, any level of improvement because of their high importance to your department would have a positive ripple effect and would probably be worth your time and energy. So that's the first step, is to really have that rank order and then a rating for the departments. So really understanding which ones are the most important and how well you're doing right now. And of course, that's really subjective. It's your subjectivity for ranking them, your subjectivity of rating them. You could maybe do it as a group activity at your department staff meeting and get your employees involved in ranking and rating the relationships, the working relationships with other departments. And that would be a conversation opener, right? And maybe even a commitment by your department to work together better with other departments and maybe lead the way and role model that and proactively be the one that goes first to try to improve those working relationships and that collaboration. And so then you have to prepare to round with them. And first, you'd consider, who would I round with from that other department? Would probably be the leaders of that department, one or more leaders of that department, but also the staff and maybe even providers. So if it's emergency department with radiology, it might be with some of the radiologists, might be with some of the rad techs, and maybe even some of the clerks or other people that work in that department. So you're really thinking about, who might I engage with in interdepartmental rounding to start building relationships and gathering information for how we can improve our working together. And then you have to consider what questions you're going to ask as you pursue that interaction of rounding. And I love interdepartmental rounding and the questions that you can ask. We have some example questions that when we're training leaders to do this, we give them a set of questions and they could use them or modify them. And usually we suggest like 3 or 4 questions, starting with a positive question, ending with a positive question, sandwiching 1 or 2 other meaty questions in the middle that will garner some good information that will be useful in improving collaboration. So a positive question you could start with might be, can you describe a recent situation in which our departments or members of our departments worked well together to serve a patient or fix a problem or improve something? So you really want to ask a question that elicits a positive response to start with. And then another type of question, 1 or 2, that might be a little more helpful in the process of uncovering where opportunities lie to improve would be, what are 1 or 2 things that we do that makes it difficult for you to do your job in your department? Or could you describe a recent situation when our departments didn't work well together? If we were easier to work with, what would that look like? Or you could ask a customized question about maybe a recent or current happening or change, or maybe an impending one, such as, in our department, we're going to be changing X in the near future. How is that change going to impact your department? Or we recently made this change in our department. How has that impacted your department? So these are questions that are very helpful interdepartmental rounding questions where we can gather some really good intel about how our department is interacting with another department. And then again, just like we started with a positive question, we want to end this encounter on a positive note. And a question that we recommend there is a question that harvests some sort of recognition or appreciation. So maybe something along the lines of, is there someone in my department that I can recognize for doing a great job? So then we can start building some positive recognition between the two departments. So let's say I'm the emergency department manager and I ask a rad tech who in my department is deserving of some recognition, and they mention my night ER nurse that was on last night. Then when I write that thank you note to my ER nurse, I can say, hey, Brad, the CT tech mentioned to me X, Y, and Z about your helpfulness last night on the night shift. Then we're starting to build that nice positive relationship of recognition between two departments. And I, as the manager, am facilitating that by harvesting that recognition during this rounding conversation in radiology, and then following up on that by writing a thank you note or showing some recognition and appreciation to my nurse based on that. So there's really a few opportunities here. One, the actual me meeting with employees in other departments is an opportunity to form relationships and maybe approachability between our departments, and also to ask great questions and use that intel to make some positive changes that will improve our workings between departments. And then also the harvesting of recognition and the follow-up and follow-through on that. So these are opportunities that present itself as positive impacts from interdepartmental rounding. Truly feel like there's a great return on investment when we put the time and energy to consider interdepartmental rounding, prepare for interdepartmental rounding, conduct interdepartmental rounding, and then follow up and follow through on the things that we harvest, including recognition and improvement opportunities. So I would highly encourage this practice if you're a department manager and your department has frequent and important interactions with other departments, and there are opportunities to improve those relationships and that workflow between your departments. So that's my episode for today. That's my tactic of the day. And I would encourage you as a department manager to consider interdepartmental rounding as a tool in your toolkit for breaking down silos between departments and building collaborative relationships. And by gosh, collaboration is a wonderful aspect of a company culture, right? When we're collaborative between silos and not just helpful within our own teams. So wishing you all more collaborative days and nights. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next week on another episode of Culture Change RX. Bye now. Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.